Are we waiting for other people to show up? Do you have any questions?
No, I'm just kind of getting through it. Like I said, I'm a little behind, but I was trying to adjust that when it seems like it's either super bright or off. Yeah.
Oh, is it? The thing is, while you hold it, if you hold it at the bottom, it'll go up. Same thing, you go up, and then when you let go, sorry, what were you saying?
No, I'm just still kind of getting the hang of JavaScript. Like I said, I've taken a little behind, but I'm just kind of working through the curriculum here and videos and get a chance to get it, but I think it should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll walk through all the basics.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, are you?
What's up, Josh? How you doing, man?
Too bad.
Yeah, good. How's life?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I had firstborn arrive.
Oh,
congratulations. So, yeah,
That's
that's why
awesome.
we-
No problem. That's very exciting. How's
Yeah.
it going?
Going well.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Sleeping?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Like Victoria is bearing the brunt of it.
Sure.
And I get a bit of it. So
Yeah.
no, but all going well. And
Good, man. That's awesome.
I've been home until this is my first day back
Yeah.
today. So
Awesome.
it's
What's
been
the
cool.
name?
Archie.
Archie?
Yeah.
Nice, I like it. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. He's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to head home now and.
Sure. Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, absolutely. Good.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But I'm going to keep trying to stay up to date through Learn.
Yep.
And I'll join back into the sessions.
And we have the videos up too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you have time to be able to go through that 3 hours while you have a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put it on 1.5 speed.
Yeah, exactly. We try and get through it as
time
fast as possible. Exactly, yeah.
Cool. Well, good to see you.
Okay, yeah, you too, man.
Yeah,
That's
we'll see you
exciting. Yeah, absolutely.
Congrats.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Yeah,
See you back
likewise.
hopefully next week.
Cool. Okay.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Last week we got to a to-do list where we could type in the item. So, go to the grocery. Misspelled, and it shows up there. And then when you click on the checkbox, it does a strike through. And when you unclick the checkbox, it takes a strike through out.
Okay.
So very basic to-do list functionality. If you add more items, make to-do list. Then we get a second one. Same thing. Oh, there's a bug in the code apparently where it's only set up, I do remember this because we only made it that far. So if you click on the first one, it'll strike through all of them. And there's a reason for that, which we'll get into later. But what I want to do, and we did this a bunch of times last time, and I think it was useful, is I want to walk through how to read this code to understand what's actually happening there.
Okay.
And I'll walk through it the first time, and then I'll ask you to walk me through and explain what's happening. And you're going to trip up or whatever. That's all good. It's just about walking through it so we can, find the problems and move forward. So whenever JavaScript files get read by the browser, they start at the top and they go to the bottom. But when JavaScript gets to a function, anything inside of that function, so anything between the curly braces, doesn't get evaluated immediately. It doesn't get evaluated until the function actually gets called. So what happens is the browser gets here and it says, okay, there's a function, that's cool, I know about it, that's good, but I'm going to skip down to the bottom in terms of the code that I execute. So I'm not going to do anything in between these two curly braces. Hey.
Hey guys.
Okay.
Then I'm going to get to the second function, which is ABC. Again, it's a function, I know about it, that's good, but I'm going to skip down until I find a function that I can actually do something with. So nothing's been called yet, so we get all the way down to line 22. Do you remember what line 22, can you tell me what document.getElementById create task is doing?
I wasn't here for it.
Yeah, well, so we've done this before.
Right.
And it's totally fine if you don't know, I'm just trying to,
Right.
if where you can participate. What would you guess that it's doing? So document.getElementById and then create task. And no idea is fine too.
Right.
It's going to search the document
Mm-hmm.
for an element with the ID of create task.
Yep. So if we go to our index.html, it's going to look in here for an element that has an ID of create-task. So what element is that?
Submit
Yeah, so it's our button.
button.
Yep, so it's going to find our button, and then it's going to, so then it says .add event listener click, comma new element. Do you happen to know what that piece does?
So it's going to do something if you click on that button.
Yeah, so specifically we are adding an event listener to the button that's listening for when it's clicked on, and then when it's clicked on, it's going to call our function named new element. So once we click on the button, it's going to call this function new element. At that point, we're going to start to execute the code that's inside of the code block. So only after we click the submit button. So we get there, and then this first thing is going to say item equals document.create element li. That's going to create in JavaScript or in memory a list item element. But it's not actually going to put it into our HTML yet. We're just going to create it in memory. So it's just the real, it's just creating this, right? But inside of our JavaScript. And we're setting the variable item equal to that element that's been created. Second thing is going to set a variable called input value equal to something. So again, what does document.getElementById do?
It's going to look for an ID that's my input.
That's right. So it's going to search our index.html for an element that has an ID of my input, which is
so it's a placeholder with a text.
so yeah. So what it actually is.
It's a text box, right?
Yeah, it's a text box. Yeah, so it's this text box, right, which is an input of type text. It has a placeholder of item that just is this grayed out thing that when we start to talk. Okay. So then we go find that element and we get its value. Its value is whatever's been typed into it at that point. So it's like if I type item, its value is the word item. If I type go to store, its value is go to store. All right, so then it checks to see if the input value, when we trim it, trim means remove any white spaces on the right or the left. So if we trim it and it's blank, so if it's not blank rather, so it's saying if the input value after being trimmed, so after remove any spaces, isn't blank, then and only then go do what's inside of our if block. Okay. And then it says, okay, item.innerHTML is going to equal our input value, which is whatever we've typed into our text box, plus there's going to be an input of type checkbox, which is going to end up being our checkbox, like the actual checkbox that shows up. So now inside of our li element that again is still in memory, we haven't actually put it onto the page yet, now has whatever our value is. So like go to store. We then set a variable list to document.getElementById myUL. So what is this line doing?
It's looking for ID myUL.
Yep, which in our case is
it's just a unordered or unordered list.
Yeah, it's just the unordered list element here that doesn't have anything inside of it currently. And then it says list.appendChild item. What do you think that does?
That's going to place whatever was typed into the text box into the unordered list.
Yeah, and specifically it's going to take this whole thing, which is our item, because our item we set to be a new element of li, and then we set its inner HTML to be the input value plus the checkbox.
Okay.
So what it's going to do is append this whole thing into our unordered list.
Okay.
All right, so now and right then, when you say append child and put the item in, right there, it's actually going to show up on our page. Okay, not before that. Then it's going to say document.getElementById check. So what's that going to do?
Look for the ID check.
Yep, which is what? It's actually on this page.
Is it the check box?
It's the check box. You see how the input has an ID of check here? So now that it's actually been placed inside of the HTML, we can search the document for it.
Okay.
And so that's what's happening here. So we go and find our checkbox, and then we say add an event listener, click. So listen for when that checkbox is clicked, and then run this. It's called an anonymous function, which we spent a lot of time on last time. But essentially what we're doing is we're calling an anonymous function, which is really just going to call AVC with our item. There's a reason for this. I don't want to run back down that path again. It's not all that important. It is worth reviewing the video from last time. But essentially what we're doing is we're going to call ABC with our item, which we've here called LI, right? So item gets passed in. So when we call ABC there, what is LI at this point?
Go to store with a checkbox next to it.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's this whole LI.
Right.
Yep. And it's going to say if document.getElement by ID. Oh, I'm sorry. So it's yeah, no, that's right. So if document.getElement by ID check is checked, so that element or checkbox actually has a property on it that's called checked. So we're going to look for that. And so if it's equal to true, and I'll show you where that comes from in a little bit, then we're going to set the style tag of our LI element to be text decoration line through. So what we're actually doing here, if I right, so when I click on this, you see the style attribute got added. Remember, we can style things in multiple ways. We can have a CSS style sheet that's outside of our document. We can put style tags inside of our document in the head, or on the element we can type style as an attribute and then put CSS directly in line. So that's what we're doing here. It's inline CSS where we're setting the text decoration to line through, which is that.
All done through the JavaScript.
It's all done through this JavaScript, yeah. And you saw it happen. Like in fact, when I uncheck it, you see how it goes away? It gets set to none. And then when I check it, it gets set back to line through. So you can see it as it's actually happening. Okay, so, and all this is doing is saying, so if it's checked, then make it have line through, otherwise make it have none. Okay. Which is just changing that style back and forth. All right, so that's the whole thing. That's how, this is how we read the file. That's how all of this stuff works. So what I'm going to do now is ask you to walk back through it again, and wherever you get stuck, it's totally fine. But just to give the practice of like actually reading through this document.
Okay.
So you want to tell me what do we do first?
So you've got the function, or you've got, so we go top to bottom, right?
Yep. Start from the top.
Work your way down.
Mhm.
So you've got your function, which is new element.
Yep.
And then you've got all that stuff in there, right? But none of it's going to matter until it gets looked at by the document on the bottom.
Yep.
So anything you've written up until now is just, you want me to walk through
Yeah.
that, or?
No. So let's just see, like, let's go through how the computer would read this.
Mhm.
So it'll say, yeah, there's a new element, but I'm not going to execute any of that code in there yet. So I know it exists, but I'm just going to move on. So we go to the end of that function.
Yep, and then there's another function, it's the same thing, it's not being called yet, so it's going to kind of keep going.
Yep.
And looking.
Yep.
Then when you get to document get element by ID, then it's going to look for an element with the ID of create task.
Yep. Which is, just for practice.
Which is the submit, it's a button with submit.
Yeah, with submit is the word. Yep. And then?
And then it's going to look. Then it's going to also look for the event listener, which is click.
Mm-hmm.
And it will create a new element if it's clicked. Is that what it's saying?
Kind of. So yeah, let's walk through this a little bit. So it's saying, okay, so go find that element, and then we're going to add an event listener to it, which is to say we're going to listen for some event to happen to this particular element.
Okay.
The event we're going to listen for is a click. That's what this is saying.
Okay.
And then when it's clicked on, I want to do something in particular. I want to call my new element function. So if this was blue, then this would need to be blue. See? So it's just saying when I'm clicked, call a function that I've defined. In our case, we called it new element. We could have called it whatever we wanted. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now, page is loaded. We have a listener on the submit button. Nothing else has happened yet. Nothing is going to happen until we click on the submit button.
Right.
So now, let's say that we clicked on that submit button. What happens next?
Nothing would happen if, because you put the, well, then it's going to get the new element function is going to be called.
Yep.
Is that what you said?
Yep.
But it's empty right now, so nothing.
What So it's not empty. So the JavaScript knows that new element has this code inside of it. It just doesn't execute any of it.
Okay.
So when you call new element here, it knows that there's a function called new element that has this code inside of it. It just doesn't execute or evaluate any of it. It just skips down to the bottom.
Okay.
And then to the bottom of this one, and then we click on it, and now we go inside of our new element function. Does that make sense? Okay. So what happens inside of our new element function? What's this first line doing? Jen, you're blocking everything.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is setting a variable that will not be changed item to search a document and create an element called li, which is list.
Yep. So it's not searching the document though. That's the only part of that was not right. So it is going to create an element, a list item element, but only in memory.
Okay.
So it doesn't actually look in the document. We're just creating it in JavaScript. Okay. So it exists in the computer, in that the computer knows about it, but it doesn't actually look in the HTML for it.
Okay.
So this is a brand new thing that we're making, but it doesn't actually exist in our HTML.
Now it's setting a similar variable
Yep.
called input value
Yep.
to, is it now searching the document?
Now it's going to search
Now
the document
it's
because
searching
it
the
said
document.
yeah. So that's the difference between create element and get element. Create element just creates it in the JavaScript. Get element goes and searches the document and tries to get the element that has.
Okay, so now it's going to search the document to get an element with the ID of my input,
Yep.
and it's also going to take in its value.
Yep. And what's its value?
It's whatever we typed into my input.
Which is, that's correct. Which is,
What did we type in there?
what is my input?
An element.
Which is,
There's an
but
ID on the element of input.
yeah, it's an
So
input.
it's text.
It's a text element. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the input text element. Yep. Okay. So then, what's line 4 do?
It's gonna evaluate whether there's anything written inside of the text box.
Yeah, it's going to look to see if it's blank or not, including, like, if I just put spaces in there, it'll assume it's blank because of that trim. That's the reason to put the trim. Okay, so let's say that it's not blank. So let's say that it is blank. What happens?
Nothing.
Nothing, yeah. So let's say that it's not blank then. What happens next?
Then it's going to create, so then it's gonna go to the inner HTML, right?
Yep, so then it's going to set the inner HTML of our item. What is our item again?
The list item.
It's the list item we created.
I
Yep.
didn't know I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. So it's the list item. So we're going to set the inner HTML of the list item to be equal to what?
The input variable that we just created by whatever we just put in the input field.
That's right. So it's just whatever we've typed into the text field. Plus, what is this?
It's a checkbox.
It's a checkbox. Yep.
I haven't even seen it like that. So are you putting the checkbox in? Just putting the checkbox in the space next to it?
Yep, that's right. So like here, I'll show you, Chin, because you didn't get to see like what the. So this is what the end product looks like. And then when I click on
that
it,
way you can.
strike it through. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Good stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So we have our input value, so I go to store plus the checkbox. So then what's this next line do?
It's gonna look for an ID, my UL.
Yep. Which is what?
It's an unordered list.
It's our unordered list element. Yep. And then
We're going to append the child to that list.
Yeah.
You did it with that list item, which is the item.
which is what? What is the item again?
List item.
Which includes what inside of it?
The
LI.
So li is the list element.
yeah, but we also put the inner HTML on there, right?
Yeah. So what's the inner HTML there? Just
The input value plus the checkbox.
plus a checkbox. That's right. Yep, exactly. I know I'm being like pedantic about this. I'm just making sure that we're getting every piece of
That's
the.
actually a great question.
Okay. So then line 8, what's this doing?
So you're looking for,
Find the checkbox, right, in the document.
Yeah, so find the checkbox in the document, which we can do now because we just put it in. So on line 7, the item actually gets put into the HTML and exists inside of our document. Before line 7, it doesn't. It's just in memory and we're messing with it. Okay, so it's only when we append the child that it actually gets pushed into the HTML. So at that point, we can search the document for an element with an ID of check, which in our case, Chenny Wright is the checkbox. And then what's this next piece doing?
Hit listener, saying on the click, run this function.
Yeah, on the click run this function. This is an anonymous function. Jen, I said last time we've done anonymous functions. Actually, you guys, we did it in together. I think you guys were here for the first time I did that. We did it again yesterday or last Wednesday. I think it's worth reviewing that. It's in the video from last time. I'm gonna ignore what that is because I can take us down. Like that was all of last class basically. But essentially what we're doing in the end is we're calling the ABC function with our item as the parameter.
Anytime I see like the function inside, like parentheses or bracket inside another one, I kind of just like.
Yes, yeah, I know. And I talk a lot about what that is and where it comes from and all that, and I can do a brief review on that later, but I want to skip past it right now because there's... okay, so we're going to call ABC item is really what we're doing there. So when we get what that does is it calls our function ABC, right? So what is LI at this point?
go to store with the checkbox next to it.
Yeah, but how do we know that? So if I go back, so Li is what? Like, what's the variable that Li? So it's item, right? I'm sorry, I don't even know how to communicate that effectively. But we called ABC with item. So when we get inside of the function, Li is item. Right? Because that's how parameters work in functions, right? So item is getting passed into ABC, and when it's getting passed in, we're saying whatever the first thing passed into ABC is, that I want to call Li. So essentially this is like setting Li equal to whatever the item was.
Does the parameter have to say item in that case?
No, it could have said blue, green, whatever. It's just the fact that we've created a variable called item up here. We've set item to be our Li with our checkbox, right? And then we're passing that Li element into our ABC function. At that point, we're naming the parameter Li. So Li refers to item in this case. If instead of putting item here, if I put a string that said Sam Birk, what is Li at this point? It's Sam Birk. Okay. So it doesn't matter what we end up calling this. This is just a reference for us to be able to use it, access it later on in our function.
The only thing is, I would think we would confuse that Li with the element we created, and it's totally separate. Right?
They're not. They're the same.
They're the same.
In this case, right? Because I'm passing the element that we created, the actual element that I created, I'm passing into the function right here.
If you didn't say item, it wouldn't pass it through.
Yeah, if you didn't say item, so if you put Sam Birk as a string, Li at this point is the words Sam space Birk. If I put in 542, Li at this point is 542. Does that make sense? Okay. But because it's item, Li at this point is item, which references the item that we created, which is this thing. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So then what do we do on line 15? Yep.
If the checkbox is checked,
Yep.
the list item style, we put the decoration on it and strike a line through it.
Yep. So what we're saying is, so search the document for an element with an ID of check, which is our checkbox. We're going to check to see if it's been checked. So all checkboxes, all elements that are checkboxes, when you're access them in JavaScript, they have a property called checked, which will be true or false. So if it's checked, then we're going to change the style attribute, which is how we have in the past inline CSS. We're going to set the style attribute equal to text decoration line through, which is just the CSS way of saying I want to put a line through the words. Okay. So that's all it is. Otherwise, so if it's not checked, then I want to make its style attribute, so it's CSS, have text decoration of none, which is say just remove the line through. Okay. And you can actually see that happening. Chen showed it a little bit earlier, but as if I go inside of the UL here, we can see our actual go to store LI. When I click the checkbox, you see how that purple is changing? It's actually changing our style attribute on the LI.
That's crazy. That's nice.
Yeah. So you can actually see it happen. Does all that make sense? Okay. So now we're going to start from scratch and we're going to do it all over again. Okay? So we're going to go through the exercise. I'm going to ask you guys to tell me how to get this functionality back. So I'm going to status.
At some point today, is it possible that we could take a look at the labs?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go through this. Today we're just going to go through this exact same functionality. Today's lesson is actually on event listeners, which is the only thing that I'm going to explore in a little bit more depth is we've used click a lot. We're going to use a key press event. So when you're typing, we're going to get the function to be called, and we'll see that there's some interesting things that you can do with that. But other than that, we're just going to go through this to-do list example, and then we should have quite a bit of time at the end.
Is the event listener week 7?
Yes. So we're technically on week 7, day 1.
And are we still going to get together this Saturday?
Not this Saturday, but next Saturday if people are open. Yeah, let me put that in, which is the 27th. So.
Yeah, send an invite so I don't get drunk on that Friday night.
What's going on that Friday night?
Just a random. Oh, that's actually how it's going.
Oh, cool.
That would be good.
Pin it to make sure we don't lose it. Cool. All right.
Did you say what time?
11 to 2. Yeah, it's in there. Oh. Okay. So if we want to be able to recreate that functionality of the to-do list, what do we need to do? Just like start leading me through how we recreate that.
So first we want to set up the foundation, the HTML. So what we're going to do is whatever text we need and put an input box, input field.
So you want to create an input field? So input and then
Type is going to be text.
Yep. And do we want to put anything else on here?
Yes. You want to put an ID.
Yeah.
Call that that.
Yeah, I can put an ID so we can access it, we can find it.
And the ID name is going to be
We can call it whatever we want. Yeah.
Cool.
What do you want?
Oakley.
Oakley? Okay. Okay. So let's just go back. It's useful when you're coding, especially as you're getting used to things, to make very small changes and then just refresh the page and make sure it's there. To ensure you don't have any errors, and if you do, you can say, okay, it's got to be in that like 20 characters I just wrote because there's nothing else going on here. Okay.
So do we want to kind of put some description text with it, I guess?
Sure.
Or submit.
Well, yeah, let's go with the submit button first. And then we could- So how do we create a submit button?
Input type.
You said put button, right?
Yep.
You shouldn't be away from the submit.
Yeah. So you can do input type. What's the type?
Button.
Button.
Yeah, so you can do this. There's an equivalent in HTML5 that's just a little bit more readable from a semantic perspective. It's just button. And then you just type whatever word you want to be there in between the buttons.
There's never a case where, well, you may need an ID at some point if you want to style it.
We're probably going to want an ID because we're going to want to add an event listener for when we click on it.
Okay.
Right? So what do we want to call the ID?
Maybe button.
Okay. Yeah, so there are, by the way, other ways of getting elements. So we use ID because it's easy. We can get them by tag name or class name. The only difference is that tag name and class name will give you back an array because there can be multiple of those things. The ID we've been using because it's just simpler because it's exactly, you get one. So you don't have to worry about calling get element by tag name and then putting a square bracket 0 because you want the first item in the array. This just ID gives you just back 1. So that's the reason why we've been using that so frequently. But I just want to make everyone aware you can get it in other ways. Okay. All right, so let's go take a look at that, make sure that that worked correctly. And we have a submit button. Sweet. Okay, there's one more thing we probably want to put in the HTML, which is where are we going to put our to-do list items after we create them?
In a list.
In a list. So what do we want to do to create?
So we want to make an order list.
Okay, we can do order list. We can do order list. Let's do an order list. Sounds good. It'll be prioritized. Okay, we probably want an ID here again. So what do you want to call this?
List.
Let's call it list. Okay. All right. So there we go. We got our HTML. We don't have any lists yet. Whoop, I must have left an S somewhere. Yep. Let's see. Looks like this. Nothing actually works yet, but we have basic HTML for the stuff we want. All right. So what's next? JavaScript. So we have console.log hello. It's not particularly useful. So where do we want to start?
I would start by creating a list item.
Okay.
And I would declare a variable at the same time.
Okay. So tell me exactly what you want me to write.
So I'm going to write const item. What do we call it? Oh yeah, item equal to document create element, and we're going to create a list item. So li equals.
Okay.
All right.
So what's that going to do?
That is going to create a list item in space.
Yeah, in space. Yeah, in JavaScript, in memory, however that you can best.
The variable item.
Yep, and then set our variable item equal to it.
All right. Got that part.
So what's that going to actually do when we refresh the page right now?
Nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, it doesn't do
In space.
nothing. Just exists in space. Yep.
All right, so then we want to somehow manipulate that value that we're going to type into the input field.
Okay.
Do that next.
Sure.
All right, so, and we're gonna name that to another variable, I believe.
Yeah. Before we do that, just as a logic, when you get started doing this type of thing, I think it's useful to try to make it work, even if it's like manual code, which is to say, even if it's not that I've typed something into the input field and then click the submit button to make the list item show up. Like we've already started to create the list item, so let's just throw some HTML inside of the list item and put it onto the page,
Okay.
so that we can see when we load the page, we actually get the list item to show up.
Okay.
So let's finish like that whole piece and then we'll move on from there. So how do we actually get this list item onto the page with something in it, like hello world or...
Can we just say item is equal to something?
So item is equal to this new element that we've created, which is li. So let's start with this is the other thing that's really useful. If you put a debugger in, you can actually see what you've done. Right? So even though it only exists in space, we can actually take a look at what that thing in space is by putting our debugger in.
Mm-hmm.
So it stops us right here. We can hover over item, and it'll actually show us these are all the properties of our item that are available to us, including inner HTML. Right? So we know that we can change the inner HTML or the inner text. We've done that a bunch of times. So let's just change the inner HTML to say, go to the store. How do we do that?
Document?
No, because we already have the item. So like we've already created the item right here.
Item that inner HTML.
Yeah.
Go to the store.
Yep. Okay. But will that do anything? Nope. Why not? What's the piece we're missing? What do we have to do to actually get it into the HTML?
Have to.
This might be the wrong, do you have to, you still haven't actually called it, right? Or have we?
We have call, so it's there. It's called. Item is a real thing. It actually exists like in space in JavaScript.
Put it in our ordered list.
We have to put it in our ordered list. So how do we do that? Yeah, because that's the thing. We haven't told it where to put it yet. Like we've created it in space, but we haven't told it where to put it in the HTML. So how do we do that?
You're going to document, you're going to get element by ID with the list.
Yep, so document.get element by ID, and then what do we put inside of there?
List.
List, because the ID for our list is list. So we say list, and then what? Yeah, we want to append it. Does anybody remember what the function? At that point, it's just a simple Google. It's just append child.
Yeah.
So we just want to call dot append child. So we're saying we're going to find the element with an ID of list, and then we want to append to it a child, and the child is going to be, in our case, item. Okay, so now, let me refresh the page. Oh, it's because, I think. I think you have to set it equal to a variable first. Nope. Cannot read property append child of null. Document.get element by ID list. It's just debugger. Can't find list. Document.get element by ID. Oh, so we've run into this problem before. I brought it up before. Does anybody see what the issue is? Think back to the fact that
You have to put the script at the bottom.
yeah. So
What did you say?
you have to put the script at the bottom, the script tag,
Because it's ready before we even.
because it Yeah, that's right. So it's running before the element is reached. So just like it reads the JavaScript from top to bottom, it's going to read the HTML from top to bottom. So what it's going to do is say, okay, cool, this is a doc type HTML. They're going to have some HTML inside of it. They have a head tag. Let me go ahead and pull the CSS in from their index.css. Okay, now let me start executing their index.js file. So right here, it stops and it goes into the JS file. It says item.document create li, that's all good. Set its inner HTML to go to store. Okay, now search the document that exists so far for an element with an ID of list. Well, if you go back to where we called script, we haven't gotten there yet. List ID is below us. And so we can't execute the script until after that element has loaded. So there's a couple of ways to do that. One of the labs actually from today is going to show you can wait for document.onComplete. So you can have an event listener that you put around all of your JavaScript. It says document.onLoad, and then inside of there you can actually put your function, which will put everything inside of.
Okay.
But the alternative to that is you can just move your script tag to the bottom. And then we get there, and now our list has been defined, so we can actually do the appending. So now if we just do .append child item, I don't think we actually need that. And now, there we go. Go to store. Okay? So cool. So we actually got something to show up. It's not a thing that we want to show up and it's happening too soon, but we do now understand how to get things into the page, which is generally a good starting point to actually see like what your finished project should look like, and then you can work to modify the code to get to what you actually want it to do. Sure. So what do we want to do next? So let's just start with, in the end, we don't want this to show up immediately, but we want it to show up after we click the submit button. So let's start with that, right? So what's the next piece of JavaScript we need to do to make it so that when we click the submit button, it makes the li show up?
So it wouldn't call it right now if it were in a function.
Okay, so wouldn't call it right now if it were in a function, so that's a good place to start. So function, what do we want to call it? I don't care.
Function, I don't want to call it list because we already have list, so we just have function to do.
To do? And then we want to put all this code inside of that function, right? Okay, so now reading the document again, how does this, what would JavaScript, how would it read, sorry, how would it execute this?
So, it's reading it, and it says we have a function called to do.
Yep.
And now we're on line 5.
Yep.
But now to do needs to be called.
So now to do needs to be called. So if we refresh the page right now, what's going to happen?
Nothing will be there.
Nothing's there. But what if I call to do right here? Oops. What if I call to do? Now what's going to happen?
It would execute the function.
It'll execute the function, I should say. Okay. So, but we don't want to execute it as soon as the page loads. We want to execute it when we click the submit button. So how do we make that happen?
We add an event listener.
That's right. To what?
To click.
The event listener is going to be a click event listener. But how do we, like, what code do I actually need to write here? So what's the first thing? We want to do it when we click on what? The button. So how do we?
Is there an ID on the input the button? The ID is button. So document get element by ID. button, then the event listener.
Yep. Do you remember what the actual code is?
Dot add event listener.
Yeah, it helps to have an ID. Okay, so then what's the first parameter?
The first parameter is
Click.
the
Click.
function. Yeah, the
Click,
click. And
yep.
then the second is the behavior, the function.
The second is behavior of the function, which in our case is
To do.
to do. Okay. Okay, so now when we click submit,
Yes.
it gets added. So that's cool, right? But right now, just when we click submit, it just keeps adding a new list item that is just go to store over and over and over again. Really, we want it to be whatever we've put inside of our input box. So how do we modify this to do that?
Want to get rid of go to the store
Okay.
and then enter HTML.
Yep. It's just, we'll just leave it as a blank string for the moment. So we want to, we want to replace that. How do we do that? So maybe the better way to put this is, what do I want to set the inner HTML of item equal to?
ID, right?
Create. Right? Is it create or is it get on?
Okay, so let me just like in plain English, what do I want to set the inner HTML equal to?
Do whatever you put into the text box.
Yeah.
To whatever I put into the text box. So how do I get whatever's in the text box?
We want the value of the input button.
Yep, and so how do we get the value, well, not of the input, but the value of the input text field, right?
Okay.
So how do we get the value of the input text field?
There the ID on the text.
There is,
Okay. So IDs only. So the document get element by ID. Hopefully dot value.
that's it.
What does the dot value do?
So value, just like you see dot style as the style attribute, value is the value attribute, which on an input field is whatever's been typed in.
Okay.
Yep. And you can obviously search for like how to get, like if you search for how to get the value of an input field in JavaScript, like you can finish. Tells you like right there. It's like one of the first. So that's pretty common thing. So you can always find that. The other way to look for that is like you understand how to get the element. Different types of elements have different properties available to them. So oftentimes it is useful to just explore and see what exists. So what we could do is instead of doing value there, so let me, so I'm just going to create a variable called input field, and it's just going to be set equal to the Oakley element. If you put a debugger in right there, when we get to that point, you can hover over the input field, and you can actually see all this information in here. One of the properties at the very bottom is value, which is currently blank. If you type something in here, you can go down and you'll see the values history. So it might take a little bit of time to like scroll through and try and find the word history, but oftentimes in JavaScript, if you're looking for, like I know this should be somewhere on that object probably, you can just scroll through, and when you find the, history is the value, you can just do value. You get what you want. So anyway, debugger is just a nice little tool for that type of thing. Okay. So we've got history, that works, and it'll keep putting whatever we have there. So we've got that piece working, which is nice. Okay. All right, so now what if I want to make it so that when I click on the element, it actually removes that element from our HTML.
When you click on it, so it's gonna be another event listener.
So there's gonna be another event listener. Okay. Where do I want to put that event listener?
I'm not sure. And you want to do that when? You don't want to do it at the same time you're doing this.
We need to create the checkbox first, or no?
So you could create the checkbox first, and then create the ID of check, and then do the stuff that we were doing before. And we could say when we. So let's start there. So when you click on the checkbox, instead of doing the line through, we'll actually remove the item.
Okay. So to create the checkbox, you need to add that in the inner HTML.
Yep.
So yeah, here.
And then.
Well, the
Greater less than. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. Input type.
Check.
And then what else do we want to? Do we want to put anything else in here?
The ID.
The ID. Yeah.
Have we created it?
Have we created?
The checkbox.
No.
We're creating it right now.
We're creating it right now. So when you use inner HTML, it's actually going to push the HTML into that element. So you can actually just write HTML right here.
So just make a checkbox.
Checkbox, sure. Okay. So that's cool. So now when we write something, we're going to get a checkbox. So now we just need to make it so that when we click on the checkbox, we remove that item. So how do we do that?
It's going to be another function, or no?
Yeah, we're going to want another function. So, well, it could be. Anyway, yeah, sure, we can create another function. Let's just call it. No, I mean, there's just lots of ways of doing things, and so yeah.
Is that the way
No,
you
that's
just showed
fine.
us?
What's that?
Is that the way you just showed us before? The
Uh,
other example?
yeah, in the other example, we created another function like this. Yep.
Alright.
So we can.
Would it be a if?
So in this case, so the reason for the if before was we were saying like when you check it, we want a line through, and then when you uncheck it, we want to take the line off, right? But in this case, when you check it, it gets removed, so it's gone. So there is no checkbox after that, right? So it's basically when you click the checkbox, we're going to remove the element, so we'll never see it again.
Okay.
So first of all, how would we remove this? So let's just for now just put console.log replace me with code to remove the element. Okay. So we'll just start with that. How do we actually call the remove function when we click on the checkbox? So we want it that when we click on the checkbox that we call the remove function. How do we do that?
Document.get element by ID with the ID being checkbox.
Yep.
Dot add event listener.
Yep.
Click.
Yep.
And remove.
Comma remove. Okay. Yep. That's exactly right. Where do I put it?
Under the other document get element.
Here. So this should be checkbox, right? Because that's our ID. And then we're going to call a remove instead of to do, right? Okay. You think this is going to work?
I think that. Wait, no, let's put it.
Well, let's just, so we so we get all right. So it says right here, cannot read property add event listener null, which is the thing we saw before. Remember when we didn't move our script tag far enough down? Why can't it find an element with an ID of checkbox here? So let's go back through.
It's in that function only?
It doesn't exist until we add it to the HTML, which we don't do until right here, right? So again, if we read the HTML, it's going to go through here, and it's going to call index.js. So in here, there's no ID check, right? There's nothing with an ID of checkbox. So we come here, we see that the to-do function exists, but we move on. We see the remove function exists, but we move on. We add an event listener to our button of listening for click, and then we're going to call to-do when we click on it. And then we look for an element with an ID of checkbox. Well, there isn't one, right? It doesn't exist yet. So where do we need to move this so that the checkbox element does exist?
We need to put it, do we need to put it in the remove function? Or do we need to put it in the to-do function? I don't know.
So yeah, no worries. So if we put it in the remove function, that would be a little bit silly, right? Because it would be calling itself.
Yeah.
Right. So that doesn't make that much sense. So let's say that we put it in the to-do. So here's the thing, right? The critical piece is that we have to wait until there's an element with an ID of checkbox that actually exists in our HTML.
Right.
When is there?
So why wouldn't we do it in the function like at the end, like after the other one?
Like where?
Document. Under the append child, can't we just put it there?
Yes. Why can we put it there?
Okay, because then when it gets there, then it's going to call the remove function, and then you'll go execute the remove function.
Yeah, but why can we put it right here? Like, what if I put this here? Can I do that?
Yeah, because it hasn't created the list item
Yeah, because it hasn't taken the list item and put it into the HTML yet. So we've created the list item, but we haven't placed it into the HTML. So if we search the document for an element with checkbox, it doesn't exist yet. But right here, an item with an ID of checkbox exists in our HTML because we've just appended it. So on the next line, we can put this function, but we can't put it in any point before that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I refresh, type it in, with the checkbox, we call it the remove function. So that's great. So now how do we actually remove that element? So what's, I was going to say, what's the first thing we need to do whenever we want to do anything with an element?
You gotta get element by the ID.
Yeah, so get element by ID. In this case, though, we want to remove our entire list item.
So in this case, is it remove element?
So removes close. So removes close to the syntax. But first we need to find it, and then we're going to remove it. So
remove. Sorry, I just googled it.
Yep.
You're going to remove, and then you need to put the element name, right?
So you could find it by the element name. So let's first start with, we're just going to do, and this will give you insight into the other types of ways of finding things in the document. So let's do document.get elements. You see how it goes plural instead of being singular, because there can be multiple. So we're going to get elements by tag name. What is our tag name we're looking for? What's that? It's OL. Well, it's not actually OL, because that would remove the entire list, but we want to remove LI. So we're going to find all of the elements that have an LI, and then we're going to get the first one. How do you get the first thing in an array? Actually, let me show you what this is doing. So list items equals, so I'm just going to create a variable there, and then I'm going to put a debugger here so we can actually see what that is. Okay. All right, so we're going to call remove. That should all be good. Cool. All right, so we create a thing, we click on it, get right here. If we look at what list items are, it's an array of list items.
Okay, so then in that case, you want to then put the number, well, in this case, it would be the first one, so you put 0 in parentheses.
Yeah, it's in square brackets.
Square brackets.
But yeah, that's the idea. So an array, and you can see that right here, right? You see that 0 that happens before the colon? Mm-hmm. That's saying that the elements at the position of 0 in the array is our first list item. If I create multiple list items, so let me go ahead and do that.
That's what I was going to ask. If you put that by itself without the array number,
yep,
it would have removed the whole list even if we didn't want it to. So now in this case, if you check one of them without the array number, the whole list, well, every list item would remove, correct?
Not exactly, but yeah, that's an issue. It wouldn't because of the way things work, but yeah, that's what you should be concerned about. Okay, so here now we can see there's actually 4 list items. Each one's a little bit different. And if you click on them and go down further, you'll see the inner HTML for each one of them is slightly different. But if we choose the first list item, to do that, to get the first one, we're going to say list item 0. If we wanted the second one, we say list items 1. The third one, list items 2. So it's offset by 1. And then Michelle, what was how do we remove it?
Remove element. To remove li.
So I think it's actually just remove.
Oh, just remove that.
Yeah. So we have the element. So this is our first list item. When we click on it, it should remove it. Okay. So did it.
Okay, but if
So if you have multiple list items at this point, what would happen?
It's not going to work anymore, Michelle. You're killing me. So, first of all, if I click on anything that... Yeah, so first of all, if I click on anything that's not the first one, it doesn't do anything.
Right. So
right.
Because we had done arrays before, instead of 0, how would you make it for any one of the list items that's checked?
Yeah, so we'll get there in just 1 second. So let's start, though, with if I put multiple list items out there. Okay. If I click on these two, nothing happens. We don't get to our debugger, which is say the remove actually never gets called. Why does remove never get called?
Because we put it to list item 0?
Yeah,
which is the first one.
No, because that doesn't happen until after the debugger. Right? So like the debugger should get hit before we do anything with list items. What this is saying is we never actually call the remove function when we click on either one of these checkboxes. When we click on this checkbox, it does. So it works for the first one and only the first one. Do you see why?
We need to pass in checkbox
So
to the function.
we could get to that in just a second, but I just want to make sure we understand why only the first one is working. It's because we said document.getElementById checkbox. All 3 of these checkboxes have an ID of checkbox. But because it's getElementById, not getElements by class name or tag names or whatever, it's only going to run it on the first one. Okay? So the result of that is it only works when we click on the first one. Now what's interesting about that, and just to sort of make the point about what the list items in the array does, if we change this to be item, let's say 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so again, if I click on any of these, nothing happens. What's going to happen when I click on the checkbox for 1?
Number 4 is going to go?
Number 4 is going to go away. Do you understand why that is, though? It's an important piece of arrays.
Because you're removing the 4th item in the array.
Because you're removing the 4th item in the array.
Because you're removing the item with an index of 3, and when the index goes 0, 1, 2, 3, we're going to remove the 4.
So when I click on that, again, so you can see right here, well, in just a second. So list items, oh, let me go one more. Okay, so list items, we have 0, 1, 2, 3, so the 3rd item, and if we go look at its inner HTML, we'll see that it's 4. So when we call remove on that, it's going to remove the 4th one. So when I go continue, 4 goes away. You see that? Cool. All right. Not particularly convinced, but we'll do more examples, so it'll be okay. All right, so, but right now, this is only working for when you click on the first item. It's not working for when you click on any of the other items. So there are some different strategies that we can take.
Change it to a class.
Yeah.
Yep, so we could change it so that it's a class. So we can say class equals checkbox. Okay, and then what else do we need to change?
Then that get element by ID checkbox, would that change?
Yep, so this is going to have to be get elements by class name. but this is going to cause a problem. See right here, it says get elements by class name dot add event listener is not a function. The reason is that this is an array, and add event listener isn't a function that you can call from an array. So you could get elements by ID 0, like we were doing previously, but that actually gets us back into the same trouble. It's just the first one that actually does anything.
So do you not want a class name?
So, well, it's okay. You can iterate over the elements that have a class name and then add an event listener to each one of them. That's one approach. Another approach is that you listen for a click event to happen anywhere on the page and then check to see if that click event happened to an element that happens to have a class of checkbox and then execute code. I don't actually want to get into that right now. We'll do it like probably next class actually. But for right now, the one thing that I want to get into before we leave this, so this is great. Like we got basically back to the same functionality that we had yesterday. The one thing I want to go over before we get out of here though is understanding, and again, this is something that we started to look at with the anonymous functions last class. When you have this callback here of remove, what's actually happening, and you'll see this if you go through the class from last week, is that remove is going to get called by the add event listener function that's been defined by JavaScript. But when it gets called, it's going to get called with a parameter called event. So what we can actually do, and we'll do it in the slightly simpler case, so we're going to remove that stuff. And we're going to say, okay, well, whenever we click on the button, we're going to call the to-do function. It's going to get a parameter called event, which we can name whatever we want, right? It can still be blue or whatever. But it's going to be the event that actually happened when we clicked, when it was called, when this function was called. So if we go back and we put something in, we click on that, you see we have events. An event has all kinds of information on it, all kinds of properties. One of the properties is type, so it was a click. Okay. Another is the source element, so what was actually clicked on. So right here, what was actually clicked on was the button. Because technically, the same event could happen, and the function could get called by multiple things. So for example, we could say that whenever you click on the input box, which we called Oakley, we're also going to call to do. Okay, so when we click on submit, we get to do, it has an event. Event has a source element, which is our button. If you look at it, and also its current target, but there's a source element, which is a button, which is our actual button, which has all the properties that we've seen in our elements previously. But you can also click on the input, and it will also call to do, but now when we look at event, it's going to say that our source element was our input. You see that? Which is Oakley. So you can call by multiple things, so sometimes you want to be able to know what actually caused the click event to happen. So events also give you, so it gives you information about what type it was, what the element was, and a whole bunch of other stuff, including in this case with click, it tells you exactly where you were clicking. So the offset of X, 66 pixels, offset Y, 4 pixels, page X, 75, etc., all kinds of information. We're going to look at a different type of event listener when it comes to the input box. In particular, we're going to look for a key down event. And I always mess up, so let me just double check. Key down. Sorry?
That when something's pressed.
Yeah, so that's when a key goes down. It's like as literal as it can possibly be. There's another one called key up, so it waits until the key comes up. The difference is the key down event happens before the character actually exists. The key up event happens after the character exists. So if I push down on the letter S, key down will get called, but nothing will. My input value will still be empty. When if I do it based on a key up, then the event will have S. Okay. So actually, it's more interesting probably to do the key up version of this. But let's make it so that when we click on submit, we call to do, and it tells us that there was a click that happened. But when we type, you can see when my key came up, my event happens, it tells me what the code was. So in our case, I clicked on the key of A. It has a character code, all kinds of information. It tells me that the type was key up, and the which is which key I clicked. There's a character number for each key on your keyboard. There's a number that is associated with it. In the case of A, it's 65, which is why it says that. The more useful and readable are things like key, which is A, or code, which is key A, okay, which are a little bit more readable, and you can use those for
This is
very.
how Google tracks us.
This is how Google tracks you, but this is also how, when you press enter when you're in the input, you can get the same functionality as clicking the submit button. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to make it so that when you click enter, we're also going to call to do, and we're going to have it do the appropriate thing. So let's start by okay, so let's just start by figuring out what an enter event looks like. So we'll just press enter, and we'll look at the event, and you can see that like what we get back is that the code is capitalized enter. There's also a key that's capital E enter, and the type is key up. So essentially what we want to say is we only want to run this code that's down here if event.key equals enter. Key. Let's just go with code. If event.code equals enter and event.type equals key up, or the event.type equals click.
Why don't you use a strict comparison?
The three equals?
Oh, yeah.
Because when I do this, the code compiles when you do 2 to become 3. It's a habit, really. But yeah, you should do 3. So then you press enter, and then we'll move this guy inside of there. So what this is saying, well, somebody tell me what this is actually saying.
So what does this first evaluation say?
If the code value of event is equal to enter,
Yep,
and the type of event is the key up,
yep. So let's say that those two things are both true. Will I execute the code from line 3 to 7?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. What if,
Or
before we even get to that, what if the event type is keyed down?
no,
What if the code is the letter A?
no,
Okay. What if the type is key up, but the code is the letter B?
no.
Okay. All right. And then what's the or say?
Or
Yep.
Click the button.
if the button's clicked.
Okay. So if I click, well, actually, there's going to be a little bit of a problem with. Oh no, it's fine. So if I
you put
click,
the enter button down and don't let go, it's still not going to run.
Right.
yep, that's right. So if I click on the button, and that's just because we have a click set up here, or I use key up inside of the Oakley, and the code that I press is enter, so which is to say if I press the enter key, only in those cases will I actually run this code.
That code is good for all buttons on our keyboard that have text. Like
It's every
in
button.
there.
Yep, absolutely.
All that.
Yep, all of
When
it.
I Googled it, it put a key code.
Yep. So there are key codes, which is actually sort of the old school. So browsers didn't used to give you nice readable versions of what the key code was. They used to just give you that number mapping, and so you had to know what the number mapping was and look for it. But we can use the nicer things. There's no reason why that's a problem. All right, so I can say go to store, and I can click the submit button, and that works. Or I can say go home and press enter, and that also works. Okay. All right, so we rebuilt the to-do list functionality. While we did that, we got to look at a couple of new things. The first is understanding events and how they get passed into our functions that are getting called by event listeners. We got to look at multiple types of events. We looked at clicks and we looked at key up. Key down would work the same way. And we were able to look at how we can find elements in the DOM, not just using getElementById, but also by using class name or tag name. Okay? So those are sort of the new pieces from today's lesson. All right. So yeah, let's go ahead and take 10 minutes, and then if there are particular questions about the JavaScript labs that you're going through, I can try to address them. Otherwise, I can come to you individually and we can work through issues.
What I like about the lab this time, kind of with the arrays and the objects I was going over, it showed us like the push, the pop, the shift, and the unshift.
Yep.
But then it wanted us to do it a different way. With like the, what's it called? It was like the append, like in this case, it's like a pen driver. It was like a different method to like push and push stuff on your array. So it seemed to me in these labs like we learned one thing, but they wanted us to do something like totally different. And I think we.
So if I remember that lab correctly, it still wants you to use push and pop. It's just, let me pull it up. Give me 1 second. I think it just wants you to find functions that do it.